Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today I'm absolutely ecstatic and super excited to welcome Simon Griffiths onto the podcast. Simon is the founder of Who Gives a Crap, the first consumer philanthropic brand to really storm onto the market. They're reinventing toilet paper with a cause to build toilets around the world and be the first kind of philanthropic consumer brand, which I think is amazing. Donated over 13 million Aussie dollars to the cause, which is just insane. Currently operating in the US, Australia, UK, and Europe, and have currently over 260 employees. So building very much a juggernaut, Simon, and excited to dig into the weeds and explore this with you today, mate. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Where I want to start is Shabin, or Shabin, if I've said that right.
Yep.
Shabin.
Yep.
And I think I love speaking to founders and seeing almost the gestation period before they start the business that kicks off. So first, I'd love if you could add some color to what Shabin was for listeners. And then the second part to that question is what are some of the failures or painful things you learned from Shabin that you believe set you up for success at Who Gives a Crap?
Yeah, for sure. So Shabin was a non-profit bar. It was the second non-profit bar in the world. I think someone opened one before us by about 6 months in Washington, DC. And the idea behind it was that we sold different beers and wines from all over the developing world, and 100% of our profits went back to organizations in each drink's country of origin. So if you were drinking our Ethiopian beers, you're helping to support small-scale agricultural projects in Ethiopia. Our South African wines, we're helping to support local language books for school kids in South Africa. So we opened that business, I think, February 2013. That was probably my first, real business in inverted commas. There was several before that, but that was the one that sort of had a real P&L and kind of accounting requirements that weren't just handled by one of the founders' parents. And so, kind of learnt a lot through that. It's called Shabin because it was sort of named after the speakeasies of South Africa that sprung up during the apartheid era. So anyone that's been to South Africa, or I believe is Irish in origin as well, the word Shabin sort of now refers to the places that you go to buy alcohol and sometimes to a party. I think in Gaelic it's sort of about like a lively party. But the origin of it is from the apartheid era where drinking and trade was outlawed in the townships. And, like what happens everywhere in the world through history, when drinking is outlawed, people find ways to make their own alcohol and sell it. And the Shabins were where that happened. So they were often the lounge rooms of people's houses, and they'd brew beers in their cupboards or bathtubs. And then people would come and kind of, they'd be a bit of a place to let your hair down in a pretty oppressed, era in South Africa. And so as apartheid fell, the Shabins slowly became legalized, and that's why they're there today. But there's still a lot of illegal Shabins that will trade off hours and kind of, be the places where people go when they need something, when they can't get it. So that's sort of the origin. And then we, the concept was pretty novel, and it actually came from a friend of mine at university who was volunteering in Tanzania, and she was sitting on the beach one day on, kind of a broken 3-legged plastic chair, drinking a warm Tusker beer. And she said, how magic is this moment? Like, what a cool moment to be kind of drinking an exotic beer in this kind of wild environment on a crappy chair that, this is perfect. What if we could take this moment and export, this feeling that I've got to a bar in Melbourne where we have a thriving hospitality scene and a, very, very well established and well-known bar scene kind of around Australia and internationally as well. And so that was kind of the concept, but doing it in a way that gave back to the projects that she'd been volunteering on initially in Tanzania was kind of the idea, or the root of the idea. And so, we opened the bar in February 2013, had an amazing kind of opening window, a lot of kind of international press because it was quite a novel concept. and ran the business for about 3.5 years before it wrapped up. I think as it wrapped up, I had a 6-week-old kid at home. We'd bought a house outside of the city, and so lifestyle wise, it was getting hard. But the real reason that we wrapped up was actually because about 1.5 years into running the business, we discovered that our basement level band room, our very loud band room, we thought the walls of that backed onto kind of dirt on the other side of it. We discovered after 18 months of trade that actually they backed onto the sleeping quarters of the police station that was around the corner from us. And it took these, detectives 18 months to figure out where this bass was coming from that was making it difficult for them to sleep. And then they made our lives miserable for about a year after that, as they tried to put restrictions on us, and we fought most of them successfully. But the one that we couldn't fight was a restriction on our live music, which got pulled back to an 11 p.m. curfew. And because of that, we couldn't book the caliber of bands that we'd used to build up the business. And we started to lose money consistently month after month, and fought really hard. And all of our advisors said we'd be able to find a way out of it. But after 12 months, we got a ruling that we weren't going to be successful, and said, okay, we need to pull the plug on this because we're losing money, which isn't where you want to be as a nonprofit bar. And so a lot of kind of, big lessons, coming back to your question, a lot of big lessons came out of that from me. Some of them were just really nuts and bolts stuff like accounting and bookkeeping and running a P&L, which is just like critical skills for a bootstrapper to get started. And then others were, leading a team where I think I probably made the most mistakes out of everything we did. Didn't understand how to kind of lean into purpose in the way that I think could have really supercharged that team. So probably made more mistakes there than successes. And probably the biggest kind of lesson that came out of it, it was this idea of selling products, making money, and then taking some of that money and giving it away. That was really successful, and it could really motivate a customer to come and buy from us versus someone else. And it could motivate our team to do things that a lot of other teams might not be able to do. And so there was something really magic in that. But I realized that in the hospitality space, which is a very difficult kind of business model to run, that also has very significant overheads, that's probably not the right place for that model to live and thrive. They say 1 in 10 businesses succeed, 1 in 50 hospitality businesses succeed. If you're trying to make profit and give it away, you probably want to be in a category of business that's got a greater success rate. And so, that was probably the biggest lesson that came out of it from me, was that hospitality is a hard industry that's very volatile. And to give you an example of this, on a Friday night, we'd make probably 60% of our revenue for the week, probably 60%. And you would staff up for that because you would be very busy. You need to have all of your staff there. And then it might rain outside of the forecast, and all of a sudden you'd be empty and you'd end up making half as much revenue as what you thought, but you'd actually lose money on that night because your staff costs are quite high, and the rules in Australia mean you can't send the staff home without paying them. And so it's a very difficult business model to get right. And when you look at the people around the world who've done it really well, they often have several venues, and not all of those venues will be doing well. You'll have a few of them that are really doing well, a few of them that are doing okay, and a few of them that are doing poorly, that they're trying to figure out how to get to a great place. And so to make it work, you sort of need to run a portfolio of hospitality businesses to be able to ride the ups and downs and test things out while being able to fund them from your other businesses that are being successful. So they were kind of the big lessons that came out of it that ultimately got me into the world of toilet paper. And probably the last one I'll just say is, bricks and mortar, not only do you have rent, but you're also limited in the number of people that can access you. And so to kind of supercharge that business model of, consumers buying stuff and us being able to give back, I said, well, let's figure out what product we can sell to anyone, regardless of what their interests are, where they live, what their religion is. That's kind of going to be the way that we reach scale with this concept. And one day walked into the bathroom and saw a 6-pack of toilet paper, and that's how we got started.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Honestly, means the absolute world to me. I'd be so grateful for a small favour, please. It is so hard growing a YouTube channel. It is so bloody hard. If you please enjoy these videos, just click the subscribe button. More subscribers equals bigger guests equals better conversations, and hopefully you can learn more as you build your food and drink brand. Thank you so much.
It's a delicious story, Simon, and there's a lot I want to pull out. And actually, ironically, I interviewed on yesterday was Sarah Willingham, who over here is one of the dragons on Dragon's Den, and she has got a portfolio of bars around Clapham, Shoreditch. But one of the things she said to me or taught me was that you'll find your business model as you go. If you've got the why, which for you was the philanthropic brand, and I think I've read somewhere rightly, you said the toilet paper was just the vehicle for the mission, right? And I think what's great is that you had this philanthropic why, went through Shabin, it didn't necessarily work, but in that and through those mistakes, you then found the business model with Who Gives a Crap. Two things you said that really kind of sparked my curiosity that I just want to kind of tease out is you said we were trying to export this feeling, and you said one of the lessons was I needed to lean into purpose more. What do you mean by, because you're such a purpose-led brand now, like, what do you mean by lean into purpose?
I probably with Shabin, there was a part of me that was, I truly believe that for it to work, the experience had to be so good that it didn't matter whether we gave money away or not. And we do apply that same lens to Who Gives a Crap. We just need to deliver a customer experience that's several factors better than what you get if you're buying supermarket product of, someone else's brand. And so with Shabin, I think I lent into that idea of the experience needing to be so good regardless of the purpose that we probably didn't play on the purpose to all of its strengths. And I don't think purpose-led brands should only play into their purpose. It creates one-dimensional brands, and we think brands should be like people that have several different aspects to their personality, and you can discover that about them over time. And they, yes, care about the world or the environment or both, but they also know when to tell a great joke, and you like the way they look, and they have a funny sense of dress, whatever it is. And so with Shabin, I think we were so focused on getting the customer experience really great that we probably underplayed purpose, and probably most importantly with our team, where I think, now we might talk about this later, but when we think about culture, we think about the three pillars of that being autonomy, where we're setting clear goals for people, mastery, where people are setting clear goals and then getting out of their way to allow them to achieve them, mastery, where people are working on a course, get a set of skills they want to master themselves, and purpose, where they know that the work they're doing today ladders up to the greater good that we're trying to achieve together. And with Shabin, we had tons of autonomy, we had tons of mastery, but we didn't nail the purpose piece. We didn't sort of, do our monthly all hands and say, hey guys, the reason why we're here is to try and prove this business model out and to try and send as much money as we can out to these organizations. And here's some of the impact that we've been able to have to date. Here's hearing from our partners with an update on what we've been able to do, or, what we're going to try and fund next. So we could have done a better job of figuring out how to, I think in Y Combinator, they call this mission to metrics, how to connect the mission of the organization into the metrics that are driving the organization every single day. And so if we could have done that really well, we could have showed every staff member how, the impact of every drink that they were selling and what that looked like at the end of the financial year, and figured out a way to kind of quantify that in the number of shifts that they do, or, the role they're playing in the business. And so I think I probably learned a lot more about that by getting it wrong and realizing that there was so much more potential than what we were able to unleash with that business when it came to leading a team with that purpose behind it.
Mm. Yeah, I love the Y Combinator, and Paul Graham is, I read his stuff all the time. I think his maker versus manager article is one of the best things I've ever written, or I've ever read. So good. in terms of this mission to metrics thing, how do you do that? Because there'll be people listening to this who have a purpose-led brand, or not necessarily a purpose-led brand, but like a vision. And I always find it's like, how do you get the vision that's in the founder's soul or the purpose that's in the founder's soul and get that to kind of spread through the organization? But like, how are you specifically doing that on like a monthly basis, maybe?
Yeah. So what we do at Who Gives a Crap is, and again, we didn't get this right first time around. It took a few years of sort of to figure it all out. But as the team got bigger, when the team's small, that purpose is sort of implicit and ingrained. It's part of the story of who you all are. As the team gets bigger, you have to find ways to make it explicit to create the space for people to rally around it. And we sort of followed, partly what Phil Collins talks about in one of his books, Good to Great, where you have a big, hairy, audacious goal, or a BHAG, that is, audacious because it's really hard to achieve. You have to really kind of crush it, many, many times over for 30 years to get to where you're trying to go to. And so for us, we realized a few years in that we needed to have that BHAG to anchor people around it. And so for us, that's making sure everyone in the world has access to clean water and a toilet by 2050. So we've got, 27 years to try and close the gap on the many billions of people that don't have access to sanitation today. And that's the goal that everyone in our team kind of really rallies around. But that's hard to quantify in terms of, how is me helping this customer with this order laddering up to that BHAG? And so what we do is we take it down to a 5-year view and say, well, if we extrapolate out where we are today to where we're trying to get to in 30 years' time, in 5 years' time, we have to be here. And that means that we're a business that's this big doing these things, and we're making donations of about this much money. And so we start to use our donations as the driver to tell us where we're trying to get to in order to solve this huge problem that we have in the world. And then from there, we come down to 1 year and say, well, if we're trying to get to this, this place in 5 years' time, it means that this year we have to do this thing, and the business needs to get to this stage. We want our donations to be this big. And then we get down to a quarterly level. That means that this quarter, every team are trying to do these core things. And this is how the role of each individual person in that team ultimately enables us to achieve the things that we're doing this quarter. So we start to really tie into, what each individual person is doing this quarter to help us get to that 30-year view, but we thread it together with a 1 year, a 5 year, and then the 30-year view at the end.
Yeah, it's always there's like the principal agent problem, which is the bigger you get, the further away the employees are from the principal, i.e. you. Like, it's always the hardest thing of how do you get them to buy into the mission and the culture. And what you've said there about this Zoom, like taking the 27-year project almost, or mission, and boiling it down, I think there's real value in that for people listening. What I know, before we hit record, we talked about like your childhood. You were born in the UK and then moved to Oz when you were like 4 years old. I'd love to know, when was the first time you realized in your, like, maybe from like 5 to 16 or 20, that you realized, like, okay, I am philanthropic, or my why is to do something bigger for the world? When did that first begin to bubble in you?
I think it for me, it was actually relatively late. So the thing that was always intrinsic in me was the entrepreneurial nature. I was that kid that put flyers in everyone's mailbox to try and like pet sit their animals for them when they were away. I made stuff and sold it to kids at school, and was kind of always trying to figure out what that entrepreneurial nature looks like. But through that journey, the idea of kind of taking something that I'd made and I knew how much it cost and selling it to someone for more money than what it cost me, that felt a bit kind of icky and gross, and I could never quite figure out why. And I think when I was growing up, business people weren't painted well. Entrepreneurs weren't painted well. They were kind of when you heard about them, it's because most of the time they were like doing something fraudulent and ending up in jail, or like going on the run and kind of, trying to evade, break the rules and do all the bad things. with the exception to that being, maybe Richard Branson was probably the one that was kind of painted in a
Yeah.
positive light. And so the narrative around kind of startups and entrepreneurship as a discipline and something that's respected and actually a good place to go and work at after university in Australia, I don't think that shifted until like the 2010s. And so, so to me, there was something that didn't quite feel right about it. The kind of broader kind of brand of entrepreneurship was not a good one. And so it wasn't until I was at university that I think I became really interested in development economics. And from me, that sort of came from, moving from Perth on one side of Australia to Melbourne to go to university, which is 4,000 kilometers away, studying economics and being a good economist and realizing it was cheaper for me to spend all of my holidays in Southeast Asia than it was to fly back to see my family in Western Australia. And so I spent 3 to 4 months of every year living, traveling, volunteering in different parts of Southeast Asia, and then eventually further afield into other parts of the developing world. And at first it was just something I enjoyed doing and I didn't think too much of it. And then towards the end of my degree, I kind of did a couple of jobs, tried engineering, which was the other thing I studied, tried investment banking, and just felt like they were the furthest away from something that I could ever imagine doing with my career. I just felt like an absolute fish out of water. And so I started to question, hey, if these kind of jobs that we get funneled into at university aren't actually going to be the right jobs for me, what is it that I actually want to do? And probably the big realization I had was that when I work on things that I'm not that engaged by because I don't care about the outcome of the work, I'm about 70, 60% efficient at them. I can't unlock everything that I've got in me to give it my full potential. And so I started to ask the question of, well, what am I truly interested in? And that was when I started to think about the developing world and this realization that actually what I was really interested in was why the quality of life for someone born, in Southeast Asia on one side of an invisible border can be vastly different to the person that's on the other side of an invisible border just a couple of kilometers away. And the opportunity set in front of those people will be vastly different as well. And so this idea of social mobility, I think, became really interesting for me, particularly as someone who, moved through different parts of the world and, gone to a public school and ended up in kind of a residential college with a lot of kids from private school around me who, you could sort of feel the kind of difference in the set of opportunities that was available just from the backgrounds that we came from. And so I became really interested in that and realized that was what I wanted to try and focus on. And so I ended up, kind of saying the corporate pathway is not right for me. I'm going to move back to South Africa to volunteer once I finish university. And while I was there, I realized that was the right decision. I'd loved working in that environment, but the skills that I developed at university were, way kind of too much. I couldn't kind of use that skill set for the volunteer work that I was doing. And so I said to myself, how do I kind of take the skills that I've learned, which are around innovation and markets and trying to solve problems and apply them to a problem that I truly care about, which is around social mobility and development economics. And that was when I said, well, maybe I can start businesses in Australia and use the profits from those purchases to fund the types of organizations that I think are out there doing great work. And so that was sort of the birth of the concept. And it sort of happened in about 2007. And then, Shabin was kind of 2013. It Gives a Crap was 2013, but crowdfunded 2012. So it took about 6 years to kind of get from that initial nugget of an idea to a business that was actually starting to trade. And I think hopefully that time frame now would be faster. Things like Kickstarter have kind of changed that. Access to venture capital was very different to what it was back then. But it was a long, windy journey to get to that point.
But I love what you said there. I love the story, Simon, and it kind of does reiterate what Sarah said about you'll find the business model if you keep kind of just meandering and following your curiosity, whether that's going to Southeast Asia, coming back, setting up Shabin. You talked about the
Yeah,
public
I,
being
I
a
should, I
public.
should say though, it is like we've also got to acknowledge that is like a very privileged view, you know, that to be able to do that. You know, I had the safety net of the Australian healthcare system. I knew I could move back in with my parents if everything went to shit. Sorry, excuse my
No, go
language.
for it, mate. I swear it's not. Don't worry.
But yeah, you know, so it is there might be people listening to this who that's just like a concept that's completely out of reach. I did a few things to kind of help get that set up, and you know, one of them was trying to figure out what was the highest hourly rate that I could possibly earn, and so I ended up tutoring economics and finance at the University of Melbourne for many years because that was the highest hourly rate I could get with my skill set, so I could work the least number of hours to make the most money to kind of fund the rest of what I was doing. But you know, that's simply not possible in lots of parts of the world. So I think what's exciting for me is that when you think about that privilege and what that's been able to unleash for me personally, if I could play a role in enabling other people who are, you know, struggling to even get access to a toilet to then be healthy to work and do all of those things, and that, you know, the many of billions of people that are kind of at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, if we can start to get them up on the economic ladder and being able to climb that themselves and give them that opportunity to unleash their own creative potential, whether that's in entrepreneurship or the arts or somewhere else, that is, you know, a massive, massive pool of untapped potential that exists in the world. And that, I think, is kind of, you know, how we truly change what the world looks like.
I'd love to know what was on those travels. What was like? Was there a specific story or a specific thing you saw that really kind of poured gasoline on your internal mission and to be like, right, I'm going to make this change, whether it's going to be Shabin or who gives a crap? Was there like a specific story you saw that was like super, maybe even harrowing or just sad or?
I think like one of, you know, after I'd done the sort of the stint volunteering in South Africa, what I realized was that the project I was working on, I thought would be really difficult to scale. You know, it was doing some cool stuff, but we very hard to get reach, you know, create the reach of, you know, hundreds of thousands of people. And really, if you're solving these massive problems, these massive social problems like literacy or sanitation or clean water, if you're not reaching 1 million people, you're probably not focusing on the right thing, because it, you know, you have to have problems that can, or solutions that can scale to truly make an impact in these massive social problems that we have in the world. And so I realized that the project I was working on wouldn't be able to kind of achieve that scale. And I started to look at different organizations through East Africa to try to get a feel for what good development looked like versus, you know, less good development in my own eyes. And probably the big observation that I had was that there were great organizations out there doing really clever, high impact work that could, you know, scale and create massive change. And when you went and spoke to them and said, what's holding you back? Why can't you do more? The most consistent response was always, we don't have enough money. You know, we need more funding. And so I started to look at, well, where does that money come from? You know, it basically comes from this philanthropy market that sits separate to the regular economy, where people are giving away money who, you know, might be just regular mums and dads, or they might be your Bill Gateses of the world. And they're all philanthropists that chip into that market. But the philanthropy market in Australia was less than $10 billion. And the size of the Australian economy was, you know, astronomically higher than that. And so when I looked at it, I was like, well, everyone's fighting for this same pool of, you know, a few $1 billion, when we've actually got the entire economy that's generating trillions of dollars around the world. And if we could skim the top of that off and put that into philanthropy, that fundamentally blows up the amount of capital that's available to solve some of these social problems. And so that was kind of the penny drop moment. For me, it wasn't, you know, like it wasn't sort of getting diarrhea or something along those lines. It was kind of this academic process that eventually got me to this place of, why doesn't this exist? You know, like we're doing it wrong. Like the philanthropy market is great and we should continue to have that, But if we can do it this other way as well, this can completely change the way that things operate. And so that for me was what really got me excited and wanted to try to test it out.
And I want to kind of take a slight turn now into humor in brands. I think it's a really fascinating topic. And I interviewed a guy, I don't know if he's big in Australia, a guy called Rory Sutherland, who's he's the vice president of Ogilvy in the UK. I get on with him. Yeah. He's an absolute legend. I mean, and he talked to me about opening, if he was to open a coffee shop in a train station in London, he'd call it Flat Whites or Fuck Off, which I just think was hilarious. And he's just a great raconteur and a great storyteller. But one of the things I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, was about how brands, he said purpose can sometimes make brands boring, was his words.
Agree.
If you have too much purpose, you become quite boring. And what I love about Who Gives a Crap is you've kind of bucked that. The outline in that regard, you've got this huge purpose, but the name Who Gives a Crap is hilarious. It's hilarious, and you've got all these like gorgeous little like puns that go through, kind of weave through the brand. But I'd love to know first, like what would you say in one sentence is a brand? Like, what is your definition of a brand?
I think a brand is something that makes people believe and feel inspired. That's probably what a good brand is. So I'm changing the definition slightly. But for me, it's about believing and inspiring, creating belief and inspiring people to do something.
And then I know you talked about, I think it was the Jim Collins Good to Great brands.
Oh, sorry, Jim Collins. I think I said Phil Collins, but it is Jim Collins. You're right.
Don't worry, mate. We can put a bit of Phil Collins drums over the top of that when you said that bit. Sorry, Jim Collins Good to Great. And then I think you're 100%, like good brands, inspire that feeling. But then great brands go that one step further. And what would you say is this? Because if I zoom out, I think you're the first philanthropic consumer brand, really, in my eyes, that has the pull of the market. Like, what would you say is the definition of a philanthropic consumer brand? Like a great one is what I'm trying to say. That isn't boring.
Yeah, I don't know how, if that definition changes, right. But I think that the belief and the inspiration that can come from it get exponentially larger. So for me, Nike is about belief and inspiration, and they are, probably like the best marketers in the world. The Who Gives a Crap core fan base that we have, they are incredible, and they, some of the suggestions they have are amazing because they're so engaged and believe in what we're doing so much, are inspired by it, that they will suggest that we give them cards that they can take into coffee shops to leave behind saying, hey, I went to your bathroom and you didn't have Who Gives a Crap. You should check them out. And so we get suggestions like that from our fan base. And there was one, it's actually happened twice now, where we got sent a photo of someone's wedding, and instead of a wedding cake, they had a pile of Who Gives a Crap rolls, and everyone at their wedding got a roll of toilet paper, which, I get tingles thinking about it, because it's sort of just amazing that people are willing to, not just willing, but excited to kind of make a brand like ours a part of a day that is so meaningful to them, because we tightly align with who their values are as individuals. And so, yeah, for me, it's still about belief and inspiration, but the places that you can go to as a purpose-driven brand, I think, are places that it's very, very hard to get to as a more traditional, straight up, for-profit company.
So completely agree. So the bigger the purpose, the deeper the purpose, the easier it is, excuse me, to almost like mobilize both people to your team and consumers, like the people who are coming in with the coffee card, the idea for, going into the coffee shop. Completely get that. But then the other side to this, and you said at the beginning, which I thought was beautiful, was a brand can be multi-dimensional. the other dimensions to this is the humor. And how do you inject humor in the brand as you get bigger? Do you see what I mean? Like, how do you keep it frivolous and fun?
Yeah, I think humor's it is a hard place to play as a brand, because what's funny is subjective. And so your copywriters and your editors have to be really good at saying that's not funny enough to enough people to kind of make the cut. But it makes it a very hard place to play. But coming back to your original kind of point or question, I think the challenge of purpose-led brands is that you can fall into the trap of being too earnest, which creates a one-dimensional brand. And for me, I remember going to this dinner party with someone who I had read about and really admire, and I sat down next to her and was stoked. And and we started talking, and I asked her what she was really interested in, and I was expecting to get a broad range of things to talk about, and she just talked about climate change and how she was terrified about where the world was going. And no matter what question I asked her to try and understand what else she was interested in, it always just came back to climate change. And I remember thinking to myself, I really admire this person. I have huge respect for them, but I'm not sure if we could be friends, because I don't know if I'd ever be able to kind of get the depth of the relationship that I needed to when they're so focused on this one thing. And that's truly how we think about building our brand, is that we want customers to be able to fall in love with us because, some people will love the packaging, other people will love the social impact or the ease of home delivery and not having to go to the shops as often when they run out of toilet paper. They're all different ways in, but we ultimately want people to fall in love with us because they discover a brand that's got many different angles to it that they like, that makes their life a little bit better in one way or another. And that might be just, delivering a joke at the right moment when they open up a box, or when they are in the bathroom and they decide to read the back of our roll and we've updated the copy, from a year ago, and so there's something new for them to look at. And so we think about all of those different aspects and try to do it in a way that, purpose is one blade that we use to cut the brand, but there's lots of others in there, with humor being one of them, with design being another, with, the great customer experience around it when everything goes wrong. They're kind of all the blades that we use to tell the brand story, plus many others. And when we get that right, it's kind of like it becomes kind of an orchestra or a mariachi band kind of standing around you, versus the one kind of solo singer who's kind of on their guitar trying to play the drums and the tambourine with their foot at the same time.
Mate, I what you said there is insane. Like, because I've done so many of these interviews now, and I asked this question, like, what is a brand? I think it's a fascinating thing to explore. And a lot of people say it's that. A lot of people say it's like you can boil a brand down to one word, blah 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 blah. But what you're saying, I think, is super nuanced, but really fascinating. Is a brand is almost more like a human being. It's multi-dimensional. It's textures. There's layers to a human being. Like, I'm into podcasting, but I'm also into like doing loads of other things as well. I think, and almost seeing a brand more as a friend almost. And that's what one of there's a coffee chain over here called Caravan, and their definitions, they said a brand is a friend. And I think if the friend, you're not going to be friends with the person at dinner party who just badges on about climate change, because they're one dimensional or a one trick pony.
I'll still be friends with them. I probably just won't see them as much.
Yeah. And I think, no, but that's mad. And then what you said there about the analogy of the alchemy of the orchestra, it's delicious. But just double clicking.
What's cool about it then is that it can evolve as well. People change over time, and brands can evolve. And if you've just got that one blade that you're using to tell your brand story, that may get old, and it's harder to evolve the brand if you don't have all of those different kind of facets to play with. But yeah, sorry, I cut in.
Yeah, 100%. And I think brands, like the best bands, reinvent. Like, I love, you can probably see the background, the Beatles. Like, I love the Beatles, they're my favorite band of all time. But what I loved about them is they just were like, right, we're going to do this, and then we're just going to rip it up and start again, but still keep our soul. And I think the brands that can do that can, as you say, like, rewrite the copy on the box, repackage the toilet paper. There's a real there's something in that for listeners. But I want to just really zoom in on this that you talked about the copywriters, because humor as a brand is an interesting place to dance as a brand. So how do you hire these copywriters? Like, what are you specifically looking for? Is there a way to test humor? Is there a way to make sure that their version of funny is unique enough but still marries up with the who gives a crap values, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's honestly it's a difficult thing, and I haven't been close to the hiring and that side of the business for a while. But I think probably what we did there was early on we wrote really good brand guidelines around what good humor looks like and what bad humor looks like. And I think our humor as well it's a particularly challenging line to walk, because you don't want to go disgusting if you go too far in one direction, and you don't want to be earnest if you go too far in the other. And so you're trying to sort of find the balance between those two, and that is subjective. And there's still, I think it probably comes from, it starts with our copywriters, and then we have our kind of creative leads and leaders who are feeding back on it and editing it. And then it's still, any major packaging changes still comes to the founders, and it's here's the packaging rollout. And every now and again, I'll still be like, I think that joke is just pushing it a little bit too far. Like,
is there any examples of that? That come to mind?
I think the one that I sort of, exercised my rare veto right on recently was, I think we wanted to write on the side of a box, "Let's get the potty started." And I just thought, I don't know, like, I think that's probably funny for, 60, 70, 80% of people, but I'm worried about the other, the small percentage, the possibly vocal minority that maybe that one goes a little bit too far. So that's doesn't happen very often these days, but that's the one that comes to mind. But in general, that team are incredible. They, they're just we have a very creative team that have a lot of fun bringing some ludicrous ideas to life.
I just love discussing the culture of these ridiculous ideas. I know you talked about when you hire people, you say, yeah, there's a thing is, I'm a scrunches or folders, I think is I don't know, this is from a podcast quite a while ago I listened to, but that's a question you ask when you hire people, if I'm right in saying, like, unpack that for listeners, because I think it's brilliant if it's not too naughty to talk about.
Yeah, I think it sort of shows, there's, when we ask people questions before they start, there's obviously a lot of very serious stuff in there. But we do want our brand to kind of shine through in who we are, and part of that, part of the hiring process is always a presentation back to us, and that allows us to understand how someone will interpret the brand and insert their own jokes, whether they're visual or written or whatever that may look like. And Folder and Scrunch is kind of part of that process where we're sort of saying, hey, we're serious and we employ people, and that's a very serious thing that we need to get right. But we also aren't that serious, and here's some of the, the fun stuff that comes along with working with us. I think we found, 60% of our company are folders, 40% are scrunches. We find folders over-index in our finance team and scrunches over-index in our creative team.
That's so jokes. And just, I don't know, listeners probably will get this, but this is just, it's how you wipe your ass, basically. Just make it clear what we're talking about. Yeah.
Good to clarify, because we did have one team member who'd been with us for about a year before the penny dropped for him. He was like, oh my God, I just figured out what folder or scruncher meant. I thought it was about whether I threw my clothes into my wardrobe or whether I folded them up before they went in. So it might not be apparent to everyone, but that's exactly what we are talking about.
And also I just find that hilarious how the way the accountant team, the finance and ops team wipe their arse are definitely folders, and you just imagine all the curators as scrunches.
And so now, now my wife and I are folders. We've got our son as a folder and our daughter's a scruncher, and I'm just scratching my head like, what's she going to be when she grows up?
She'll be the feisty rambunctious creative. I wanna go into this because you're one of the brands, in my opinion, that have kept the magic as you've scaled. And another learning from doing loads of these podcasts is sometimes scale can kill magic and scale can kill culture. Often what happens in kind of food and drink, it's not like a blanket statement, but a lot of times you get people who come in who aren't the right culture fit, who aren't the right hiring, and it can be like a cataclysmic bomb that just decimates the culture. Maybe that's a strong way of saying it, but you know what I mean. And but you've seemed to do this right, and you said you ask some really serious questions when you hire, but you also ask some quite jokes questions when you hire. What are the serious questions? I know it's different per role, but just this could really help people listening. What are some of the serious questions you ask first? And then what are some of the playful, frivolous questions you ask to pull out that fun part of the purpose?
I guess when I think about, we think about culture and hiring as trying to find the right culture adds to the business. So it's not culture fits. It's, culture is continuously evolving. We're adding people in. Will they add to the culture? And so when we're asking serious questions, it's technical questions like how good at this.
Sorry to interrupt. So by culture add, what? Because I haven't heard that phrase before, if I'm being honest. But what do you mean by that? Sorry. So that's like, how's that different from fit? Because everyone thinks, right, I need the right culture fit. Like that's kind of the narrative.
Fit implies that you've got fixed guardrails and someone has to fit inside them. Right. What we're saying with culture add is this person may be different to what we've got inside the organization today, but we believe that they're an addition that is worthwhile and they will stretch the culture in a way that is meaningfully better or positive. And so it's, I think part of the problem with hiring and diversity and equity and inclusion is that often people sort of match who they are themselves when they're hiring people. And so we're actively trying to push people to think about who's, what are the right additions rather than, someone who's a culture fit within the organization that we have today. And we believe, diverse teams, diverse cultures will outperform in the long run. There's a lot of kind of science that says that that's true. And so we want to be kind of pushing and stretching and evolving the culture over time and hiring in a way that enables us to do that. So that's kind of the philosophy. So to kind of try and figure out whether someone is a good culture add, we've got a lot of technical questions. We want to understand, can this person be great at their job or the role that we've got for them? But then we've got a lot of questions about, can this person thrive in our organization? And so we're a remote first organization. We've always been a remote first organization. For some people before COVID, that was a big problem. They'd come in and they'd never worked in a remote team before. And about 2 months in, they'd hit this slump where they're like, I don't know if I can do this. I think I need an office to be able to, actually do my job well. And we'd have to coach people through that and get them out the other side. And so, a lot of our questions before COVID were about, have you worked in a remote environment before? What does that look like? What do you need to succeed? And trying to understand whether people can thrive in that environment and whether we could support them through it if we thought there were risks. So they're kind of examples of the, the serious stuff. And then the fun stuff for us, it probably kind of creeps in around the more serious stuff. So one of the ways that we sort of, informally kind of assess for this is when a candidate's coming through our interview process, the second last stage is the homework stage where we give them a deck that's got our brand guidelines in it and allow them to present back on their homework assignment using the Who Gives a Crap brand. And so it shows us how they incorporate, our brand into their thinking and if they're able and comfortable to stretch that in ways that bring humor out or whether, it doesn't kind of translate in the way that it needs to. And that's not a perfect test. Some people aren't great presenters and don't need to be and will never do a presentation in their life. But it allows us to, understand, how someone kind of approaches the work that they do and working and collaborating with other people and presenting back to them as well. but you don't need to nail that presentation to work with us. As I said, it's for us to see how you work rather than what the final output necessarily looks like.
Yeah, I think what you said there about this culture ad piece is just fascinating, Simon. It's like rejigging the way I'm thinking about after doing so many of these conversations, which I love. Well, I love doing them. But what you said there about it being a remote-based business, even pre-COVID, that's mad, because not the narrative can always be broken, right? But there's a big podcast over here called Stephen Bartlett. I don't know if he's reached Australian shores yet. He's great.
Yeah, no, Stephen. Yeah.
He talks a lot. Yeah. But I listened to a podcast about him the other day. He was talking the other day about how he has his team in the office, like mandatory, because he believes when people are closer together, back to your what is a brand, it's a feeling, it's an evoking emotion and a purpose. He finds it easier in an office space, which I kind of get. Why were you guys remote? Like, what's the advantage you get for being remote? And surely it's really hard to ingrain that mission when people aren't always there. Does that make? I just love to explore that.
No, I don't think that's true. But let's come back to what Stephen said. So, he believes that it's easier to do that when he's got everyone in the office. So I think when you think about that sentence, all it is assessing is the return to the business, but it doesn't assess the cost to the employee. And so you could probably break down what he's talking about and say, well, okay, let's suppose we agree that that's true. And we do believe that FaceTime and collaboration is important, but doesn't need to be 5 days a week from 9 to 5. Should it be 7 days a week? Should it be 3? Should it be 2? Does it need to be like that for every function in the business? I know someone who works at I probably shouldn't say the company, but a very large tech company in Los Angeles, and they've just mandated that he has to go into the office 3 days a week. For him, that's an hour and a half commute in traffic. He doesn't work with a single person in that office. So he has to drive to the office, to sit in the office with no one that he collaborates with for the day before driving home. And he's saying, I can't do this. Like, I need to find another job. And so I think that equation of it's better for the company ignores the costs for the team. And so we see that benefit and we believe it's there, but we also believe that there's hidden benefits of letting the life of the team sometimes come before the work of the team. And if we get that balance right, the life-work balance, not the work-life balance, we think life comes before work. If we get that balance right, then what people are able to unleash at work can be different to what they are if they're constrained to a regular 9 to 5 office environment, 5 days a week. And that's the philosophy that we started with. I didn't want to be in an office. I hate offices. I've spent not very much time in them, but enough time to know that I'd never want to be in an office. And, it enables me to have a lifestyle that's very different to what I could have done if we had an office. We live an hour out of the city. I can go and swim in the ocean every morning. I can surf in the middle of the day. The quality of life that I get from that makes me a better person at work the rest of the time when I'm at work. And we have a policy at work that if the surf is awesome, it's pumping, it's a killer day, you don't want to be on a call with me because I am begrudgingly on a call with you while I'm thinking about what I'm missing out on the other side of that call. And no one wants to be on the other side of that. And so our policy is, if that's happening, go and do the thing that's important to you so that you can then come back and do the best that you can at work. And for some people, that's about spending time with their kids. For other people, it's about getting the right exercise schedule through the week for what's important to them. For me, that was, there's lots of different parts to that. But I think if you start to think about that equation as both a cost and a benefit, then it starts to be a different equation to just thinking about the benefit to the company.
Yeah, it reminds me of that book by the Patagonia founder, like Let My People Go Surfing, I think it is, which is
Yeah.
great. My only
boardroom.
not necessarily pushback, but I agree with this. Life work balance is super important. But I now, to do this podcast, I'm living with my parents, moved home, and I sometimes feel super isolated. And I'm like I want to be in a room with other creative people, other scrunchers, and almost get that osmosis and that, like, bouncing ideas off, going for a coffee, having the water cooler talk. But I'm buggering off to Colombia in a couple of weeks to do this. So, like, I get your life balance part of the equation and go to Costa Rica as well. But how do you get that osmosis, that water cooler, that, I don't know what you could, I don't know what the word is for it, but it's something that is kind of important in creative cultures?
Yeah. So what we did, before COVID, I think we were at about 50 employees when we did it. We sort of said, we've built a remote team to date. It's allowed us to hire anyone, anywhere, which we think is a great labor strategy, because we can get the best talent regardless of, where they're from. We said, this has been great, but we think in this next chapter, as we move into, international markets, stepping outside of Australia into the US and the UK, we think we probably need to bring people together around these hubs that are localized in the core cities where we're working. And so we had one in the Philippines, in Manila, one in Melbourne, in Australia, and one in Los Angeles. And we moved 2 of our creative team to LA, and we built a creative team in LA. In Melbourne, we focused more on our kind of operational parts of the business, like at the time, supply chain, finance, what we called more headphones type work. And the Philippines was mostly customer at that point in time. And so we got those hub teams together and we said to them, you set your own rules. How often do you want to see each other to get the most out of working together? And our Filipino team all said, I don't need to collaborate with anyone. I don't want to be stuck in traffic, because the Filipino traffic in Manila is, the worst, literally the worst in the world. I would be happy to see everyone once every 1 to 3 months. And we said, okay, well, we don't need an office. We'll just bring you guys together to do something fun together on a weekend. So there's no traffic 1 to 3 times a month. Once every 1 to 3 months. Our Melbourne team said, hey, I do mostly headphones work. I don't need to collaborate, and I don't, that's not what gives me what I need to do my job well. So I would like to see people, but only once a week, and I'll choose the day. And our Los Angeles team, digital product, creative team, our marketing team, they said we get more benefit out of collaboration. So we're going to come in 3 days a week, and it's going to be Monday, Wednesday. What was it? I think it was Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. So everyone was at home on Fridays. We tried that for about 2 years, and we built really strong kind of team cultures. And then just as we were about to come out the other side of it and start to move back to a anyone, anywhere style model again, COVID hit, and it kind of, we were just about to start the decision-making process on making that switch. And then COVID kind of forced our hand, and we went back to the model that we've got today. And so what we do today is we know it's important for those teams to work together, but we don't think it necessarily needs to be 3 days a week. We can do more intensive working periods together when we've got, particular projects that we're working on. We find ways to collaborate online. We're, massive Miro users now.
What's Miro?
It's kind of like a collaborative whiteboard or post-it type software platform, who we were on very early, and find that as a very powerful tool for us to kind of collaborate together. And then we try to bring the whole company together once a year. I think we're going to do that a little bit less often now, because as we've got bigger, it's a huge lift to bring everyone together. We had everyone in Melbourne in May, which was, over 200 people, which was incredible after not being able to do it for almost 4 years. And then our teams get together, usually kind of once a year as well. And those are kind of orchestrated as our core kind of in-person moments where we want to maximize that time and get lots of stuff done together. and then go away and have, a culture that's built off those in-person moments that help to make it stronger. So yeah, it's sort of a bit of a mix. And then now we hire anyone, anywhere. If we've got more than 5 people in a location, we'll have a co-working space that they can go into and work with together. We find that's really popular in some hubs and less popular in others. So it sort of just depends on who's working on what and who they're working with.
What I love about that answer, Simon, is a bit like, how we were talking about a brand being multi-textured or multi-dimensional. The way you've hired and built this culture is the same. And I think people, and even sometimes myself, you want things to be so binary and black and white. It's like, this is how it's going to be fully remote. And what you've teased out there is it's so subject dependent, location dependent, whether you're like a scrunch or a folder dependent. And I think there's a lot in that. And it's fascinating. One thing I've got to ask, I asked this to a founder who surfs. So I just think I think there's a lot of parallels between surfing and being a founder, like leaning in, the fear of going into leaning in and kind of embracing your fears and going through it, like the wiping out. What's surfing taught you about being a founder?
That's a really good question. I mean, the classic saying is you've got to be in the water to catch the wave, which is very true. And, for who gives a crap, we've been in the water to catch a lot of the waves that have come with, things like crowdfunding when we got started, things like the share button on Facebook that sent us viral with our first campaign, things like Shopify, which when we started was a crappy little platform and now, is a kind of tech behemoth. So we've been in the water to catch the wave a lot. And for me, that's partly about right place, right time, but it's partly about the preparation that goes into that moment. And so COVID, in a way, when the world ran out of toilet paper, we'd spent 6 years training for that moment as a remote team that sold toilet paper online. It was kind of, it was like, we were like, we've got this, we know how to do this, guys. Let's go bring this home. And so I think that's probably one of them. And then probably the other is that no matter how big and scary something looks, it's never as bad as what you think when you screw it up. And probably the last thing is sometimes it's out of your hands. You can look like everything's, you can think you've got the best strategy. You can think you're right place, right time. You can think you're absolutely going to nail it. And sometimes you just have to accept that nature is going to work in a way that is unpredictable, and that's going to cause things to happen that are out of your control. They're probably the 3 biggest things that come out of it, which are all, subjecting yourself to the wave, so to speak.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The guy I interviewed, his lesson was about finding that I don't surf, right? I know nothing about surfing, but I used to wakeboard. That was as close as I got. But he was talking about the slipstream in business, and he was saying when he was a kid, he was paddling out, and he was just getting absolutely fucked by these waves. And this guy said to him, "Look, if you just pull out there, you'll find a slipstream, and you'll get pulled out faster." And yeah. I think that's so true in business as well, as you can kind of bludgeon your head against a wall, and actually if you actually open up the blinkers, there's an easier way out. But what you said there, you've got to be in the water to catch the wave. And you talked about the timing of Shopify and also, I suppose, like doing the remote work thing before the remote work thing was a thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
I'd love to know, you said sometimes nature's just you can be prepared, blah, 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 blah. Nature's just going to come and wipe you out. Like what's been, I suppose we're linking this all together, what's been the crappiest wipeout on your journey, and how did you get back on the proverbial board and or journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of wipeouts. The most recent one it's pretty mundane, but our inventory management system went haywire and sent out thousands of wrong orders to our customers in the UK. So we had to manually work through this order system. That happened a couple of weeks ago. What's cool about those moments now is that the team, everyone rolls up their sleeves and jumps in and is like, we got this, we we're prepared. We've been training for this moment. Let's go, like bring this home. And they're kind of amazing moments. I think one, the probably the one I've talked about the most, or maybe I won't talk about that. I'll talk about a different one. And that was in 2018, we took 32 of our 36 team members to Cambodia to see the work of WaterAid firsthand. It was the first time we took the full company into the field to see one of our impact partners work. And that trip was amazing. We built that connection to purpose in a way that is inextricable for the team that were on that trip. Many of them still with us today. We have incredible team retention. What was kind of crazy about that trip was while we were there, I think we just moved warehouses. Our second largest warehouse had just moved locations and operator. We ran our biggest ever campaign and sold way more product than what we were expecting. And it was this free trial pack that we were trying out where people could sign up for the free trial pack, pay for shipping, and we'd sign them up for a subscription that would start 3 weeks after that trial pack arrived. And we're all away in Cambodia, out in the fields, no cell service, no Wi-Fi, connecting to our purpose and seeing the work of WaterAid, which was really meaningful. And we came back into Wi-Fi range and discovered that not only had our warehouse that we changed over misshipped our free trial pack, and instead of sending a trial pack of toilet paper, they'd sent 12 boxes of tissues to every customer that was on the customer list. We'd asked them to fix it. They said they'd sort it out, and they did the same thing again and sent out another 12 boxes of tissues. And so we had all of these customers writing in saying, what the hell's going on? Where's my order? And then we were not able to reply to them fast enough because we didn't have Wi-Fi. And so they started writing in saying, why haven't I got a response? And so we started to have 10 times the number of customer inquiries that we would normally have coming in. And just as we were about to say to everyone, okay, guys, pens down, it is time for every single person in the company to respond to customer inquiries, 16 of us came down with food poisoning. So we were overseas, flying at half mast, so to speak. And we were like, this is not good. Like, this is a terrible customer experience. Our customers were commenting on our social media ads, like, what the hell is going on? And then customers started writing in saying, I need you to know that the largest newspaper in Australia has reached out to me because they saw my comment on one of your social media posts. And they want me to comment on you not living up to the promises that you've made to your customers. I'm not going to talk to them, but I want you to know that they're probably contacting other people. And so we knew in that moment that we were about to have, an attempted assassination on the brand, so to speak, by a newspaper. And so we said, okay, we have to do something in the next 30 minutes. Otherwise we're gone. How do we respond in this moment? And we said, the only thing that we can do is be open and honest with our customer. And so if you go back through our Instagram or our Facebook on, I think the sort of middle of May, about 18 May 2018, you'll see that we published an apology to all of our customers. We sent that out to every single customer in the region that was affected by this warehouse. And we basically explained, hey, this is what's happened. We've had a few operational mistakes. We're overseas with WaterAid, and we've all come down with food poisoning. We're going to get back to you. If you've got a problem with your order, we will sort it out or refund it. But we need a little bit of time to be able to get back up on our feet. And we thought that was going to be a pile-on when we posted that apology. But if you go and look at that post, there's well over 100 comments on there. Literally every single one of them is positive, and it's people saying, oh my God, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. You guys need to get yourselves back in order before you sort me out. My problems aren't big in the grand scheme of things. And so I think we learned in that moment the power of being open and honest with our customer and showing them under the hood of the brand, and that we're just a group of people that are trying to do our best to bring this crazy idea to life, and really kind of allowed them to build empathy with what we were going through in a way that, someone like Nike probably can't do. And so in that moment, I think we actually, through we turned what was a really terrible customer experience into one that for many of those people deepened their relationship with who we were as a brand in a way that I think would be very difficult to do in any other sort of circumstance. And so we talk a lot about our customers forgiving us for our lumps and our bumps as long as we're open and honest about them. And so when we screw up or when our customers ask us questions that we don't know answers to, we, figure out what the right answer is, and we come back to them and make sure that we're being open and honest about what that looks like. And that extends to our team as well. We're very transparent as an organization. There's no question we won't answer unless it's about, confidential information about our employees or things that could be harmful to our business if it's external to someone that we don't know. But that's, broadly the philosophy, and it comes from those moments of the power, realizing the power of showing our customers who we really are.
Realizing the power of showing customers who we really are. Again, it's back to that as you said, multi-dimensional, multi-textured brand, but so are humans. And when you reveal that and through open transparency, you build a deeper connection. I think, it's owning your lumps and bumps. Absolutely love that. I want to talk about, so you've got this global mission. I want to talk about almost colloquialism and who gives a crap and getting the humor to land in different countries. Because I think it's a fascinating, incongruous kind of beast to slay. And I think there's loads of mishaps. I've actually got here a quote you said that we're having to think about translation and local language support as you get bigger. And I've gone through, I've just found I don't know why I found this, but what the McDonald's in different countries. So there's Golden Arches in the United States, Mickey Dicks in United States as well, McAdoo Japan, Mackey's UK obviously, McDonald's Mexico. There are just a few examples, but I think what that illustrates is that culture specific, you can just have a complete car crash with getting those messages to land.
Yep.
How are you doing that? How are you getting the humor of who gives a crap to land in Mexico or whatever country? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we've got good at doing it in English. I think the challenge for us that we haven't figured out how to overcome yet is how we go into different languages, and that's partly just due to some operational stuff where we haven't yet translated website into non-English speaking languages, but it's coming up shortly. It's just been delayed a little bit. But I think one of the really fun things about working at Who Gives a Crap is when you use an expression and someone sitting next to you goes, "What did you just say?" And I did this recently in London, talking to our team, and I had my co-founder Danny next to me. We've been working together for 10 years. And I said, "It's horses for courses." And everyone in the room went, "Yeah, okay." And Danny was like, "What? What do you mean horses for courses? What does that mean?" And so it's kind of those moments where you realize that there is this massive disconnect sometimes between our different cultures and languages, even though we're speaking technically the same language. And that's what humor is like across markets as well. And so I think what we did early on was we had our kind of first creative hire worked with Danny, who I was just talking about, and she was Australian and worked in London, and he was American. And so between the two of them, and her wife was British. And so between the two of them, they could pretty much figure out what the humor and how things would translate across those three markets. And then as we've built that team up, we've really intentionally hired internationally. And when we work on projects like packaging, but also physical products, our Good Time shampoo bars are a great example of this. We intentionally pick people to work on them that sit across many geographies. And, another analogy for this is our shampoo bars, where the performance of those shampoo bars, or the performance of our humor being the analogy, will depend on which country you're in because of the softness of the water and that impacting how the shampoo kind of plays out in use. And that's, I think, a really good analogy for humor, in that you need to find the product or the joke that lands across all of those markets in a way that allows you to deliver the customer experience that you want to. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you're testing it out across all the markets that you play in. And that extends, yes, to product, yes to product. I won't go into too many details there, but to marketing in general, you really need to test those messages out across multiple geographies to get that right. I think my uncle-in-law, he was a Hispanic advertising guy, and he told me this story about this very popular car in the US that they pushed into Mexico without testing the name, and the name was basically a swear word. And so the sales of this car totally flopped after it was wildly successful in the US. And so there's, that was kind of, I think that instance was, he talked about that as being the birth of the Hispanic advertising industry, because the American ad execs realized that actually they needed to have, local language ad execs to be able to help them figure out how to translate brands across markets. And that philosophy, I think, plays out with us today.
I always find it's such a mad and fascinating topic. And I think going into the McDonald's thing, right, is how they have different products per geography, right? Like the McRib isn't in the UK. I'm sure you guys have got something in Oz that is different, and it is this kind of globalized, localized play, which is fascinating. Are there any examples of where the messaging hasn't landed, or something that's like been taken a lot of toil, like to get right?
I think I can't think of any examples where we've got it fundamentally wrong. I think what we're seeing now is the evolution of this, where what we've done to date has been have a team that generates a message that resonates globally. And what we're starting to do now is use local teams to start to evolve those messages to what messaging is required locally in order to see things really perform. And this probably played out, in the UK first last year, when the UK got hit by the cost of living pressure before any other market that we were operating in a meaningful way. And so our UK team was really saying, hey, we have to think about how we address this with the messages that we're playing to our customers. And that concept and that strategy eventually became relevant in all of the markets that we were in. But we needed that kind of local nuanced knowledge to be able to help us figure out how to create messaging that was landing with our consumer. And we got there in the end with an incredible message that explains that our products are, up to 30% cheaper than what is arguably the best known brand in the UK. But it sort of required a local mindset to help us get better at what we're doing globally, rather than just applying the global message across all of the markets, which is what we'd done previously.
Mm. Yeah, it's something I hadn't thought about, because I think a lot of brands in the UK try and go into France, and it's just it's a car, not a car crash, but it's just their way of consuming so different, even though we're so close geographically.
And I'd say arguably America is probably almost as far away as France in terms of the way that it consumes. Australia, I think, is relatively similar to the UK.
How would you say the US is different from the UK? Because obviously you're across all three of those countries, right? So I'd love to know what you've seen in the US versus us.
I think that the expectation of the American customer is very high, probably because it's the home of venture capital. And so, people have had hundreds of millions poured into companies that then run at huge kind of negative margins, negative net profit margins, which allow them to deliver customer experiences that are, become hyper competitive as you get more venture flowing into competing companies against each other. And so that creates a set of expectations for the customer that I think is difficult to, it's a higher set of expectations compared to what we have in Australia, where there's less competition. E-commerce was a fractured market. People were used to things being delivered slowly or with large shipping costs. Whereas, America's kind of at the pointy end of consumption. I saw this even, coming into London 2 weeks ago, walking, I think Waitrose is often put up on a pedestal as kind of the premium retailer. But compared to some of the premium retailers in the US, the selection in Waitrose is really limited in comparison. You know, you walk into the drinks fridge in the US and it's this like sea of rainbow colors of all of the wildest things you could ever imagine. Some of them with CBD in them and others with, you know, all sorts of amazing things. And you sort of feel lost in this, like in this moment. And so I think, you know, the American kind of consumer gets used to that as being their normal experience. And that makes it harder to kind of stand out as a brand, I think, compared to maybe the other markets that we're in.
I went to New York to do an interview with a brand called Athletic Brewing. I don't know if you know them. Yeah. They're like, it's an amazing brand. And I was walking around the Whole Foods and I felt like, I was like, everything's just bigger over there. Like the buildings, everything is just bigger. And their kombucha section, I was like, this is like, I felt like Willy Wonka at the fucking kombucha section. Do you know what I mean? I was like,
it's the Willy Wonka feeling. And I don't think I've got that anywhere else in the world, but it's like, it's in every American supermarket.
it's mad. And then let's play. I want to go into Melbourne specifically because, as I said to you before we hit record, I've got a mate who's moved over there. He's built a couple of really big brands in the UK. He was Green and Black's marketing director, Pret a Manger marketing director. Yeah, so he's moved to Melbourne and he's got a really good. He says there's a lot of brands in Melbourne that are just cool, and it's the same in Ireland. I've got weirdly Ireland is this very niche vibe when you can almost like look at a brand from Ireland and challenge a brand like that's Irish. It's fucking weird, right? But I'd love to know. Like, what do you think's in the water of Melbourne that has this, like driving force that creates a very unique kind of brand? And for listeners, just to give some context, like Minor Figures, who are absolutely flying over here, Stu is from Melbourne, and his previous business Keep Cup was based in Melbourne. Like, what would you say is in the Melbourne water? Like, what's in the Kool-Aid?
Yeah, I think you know, Melbourne's sort of like the arts kind of capital of Australia. Weirdly, it's the sports capital of Australia as well. Those two things don't normally go together. But I think, you know, it means you know, it's not a glamorous city. Sydney is like it's beautiful. Like if you've been to Sydney, it's up there. Like it's one of the best in terms of beauty. Melbourne doesn't have that. And so I think as a city, we've turned more internally to, you know, and you see this around the world, often the colder climate cities tend to have stronger kind of arts cultures and hospitality cultures than the more glamorous kind of beautiful cities that there are in the world. And of course, there's exceptions to that, but that's, I think, kind of what's happened in Australia historically. And it's probably changed a lot in the last 20 years in particular. I think, you know, access to the internet has sort of democratized access to what good looks like in a way that, you know, didn't exist 20 years ago. But I think what that means is that you've got people who have a high kind of bar for what good design looks like and what good, you know, good fashion architecture, kind of whatever that is. And for me, brands are kind of a part of that. You know, they're an art and a science to them that kind of fall into those same sort of categories. And so when you've got people that know what good looks like, it becomes easier to make things that are better. You've got great agencies, you've got you know, people with great taste who know what great products, you know, literally taste like if you eat them and so on. And so the kind of conglomeration of industry that's happened in Melbourne, I think has made it somewhere that that maybe makes it slightly easier to create things than what it might be in other parts of the country. And of course that's changing, and it's, you know, we're seeing incredible brands come from all over the country, but certainly I think Melbourne's been a real sort of hub and home for that over the years.
It's like a completely 1,000 gazillion % agree with like the cold weather, like the more kind of rough and roughy and maybe like dilapidated the original kind of city or town, the bigger the art. The obvious of this is in the UK. All the best bands are from Manchester and Liverpool. Oasis, Stone Roses, Arctic Monkeys, like Joy Division. They're all from. I went to uni up in Manchester. So the weather is, and it's a bit of a rough city, but you can kind of see, like, as you so rightly said, it's this internal forces more art in these cities, which is fascinating. What are some of the brands in Melbourne that are like are cool? So I'd love to sort of try and get hold of some of them.
I mean, I'm probably like closer to the other thing about Melbourne is that we have I forget what UK politics are. We have the two sort of major parties are Liberal and Labor. Melbourne, we have the Greens. They're the party that Melbourne supports, and so that's probably the other thing that comes in that twists brands into having a bit more of a kind of social or environmental element to them. It's a city full of people that are probably more progressive in their kind of political voting, whatever you want to call that, beliefs. And so the brands that I kind of look at, the sort of new stuff that's coming out are probably the brands that have got that social bent to them. So Great Wrap is one that I love. They're doing compostable cling wrap that's made with food waste and producing it with solar power, and have just started selling across in the US as well as in Australia. So they're one that's awesome. There's heaps of them. Belroy is another great one, doing backpacks and wallets. They started with wallets, now do backpacks. Amazing global business.
Oh, I've seen those guys. Yeah, I've seen Belroy.
Yeah, really, really strong global brand. Turning plastic bottles into backpacks is kind of what they're doing most of at the moment. But there's tons of them. Minor Figures, as you talked about. There's. I wish I'd sort of prepared a list because I'm struggling off the top of my head.
No worries. I think the other one that Mark was telling me about is Pears. I think he was telling me they've just sold the soap that's in all the banging restaurants. But Pears is like it.
Aesop is another one. Aesop.
Yeah. Where I want to go now is I try and push myself to ask some hard questions. So, like, if you're not comfortable, like you're in the driving seat here, so we can like cut it out for sure. But I'd love to know, like, what's been kind of. We talked about like how I believe not all founders, but a lot of founders have kind of like an internal friction as to why they're doing something. And the quote I love is by Robert Greene, which is like the bigger the shadow, the bigger the kind of the darkness potentially, the more you can use that as a force for creative good. Again, back to, I don't want to keep talking about the Beatles today, but like, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, both their mum died when they were like 15, and they had this pain in this shadow, but then they've created the fucking Beatles, right? I'd love to know, like, what is in your shadow that drives you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know if I have a shadow, so to speak, but I probably realized a few years ago that I never felt like I was a normal person. I always kind of wore weird clothes and, turned down corporate jobs to kind of do stuff that looked really dumb on paper. And that, I think that made it sort of difficult for me to kind of empathize with other people and relate to other people that were not as weird maybe as what I was. And a few years ago, I started to realize that actually wasn't a weakness or a negative thing. It was actually probably a hugely positive thing for me, but was very hard to kind of deal with growing up. So I don't know if that's like a shadow, so to speak, but more just a very powerful kind of realization of the power of being different and thinking differently, and that I probably will never feel normal, and that's actually a good thing rather than a bad one.
That's why I love speaking to founders. Like, we're doing a drinks tomorrow night. We've got about 100 founders who listen to this podcast, all in food and drink, who we're meeting in King's Cross for a drink up.
Yep.
But why I love it is because they're all fucking weird, like, but in a good way. So how
Often
did
around
you?
things that do feel more normal.
Yeah.
Know what you mean.
And then then there's that desire to to like, well, that realization that you're not necessarily like slightly different, which I think every founder comes across, which is super reassuring. I then listened to a talk you did, which was in 2019, so 4 years ago, and it's 10 lessons I think I wish I knew when I graduated from uni and at the UWA Career Connect. I don't know if you can remember that.
Yep.
And you said the best advice you've ever been given is you can't do that. And I think building this onto kind of the shadow, the internal friction, I have that a lot so I've basically a lot of my kind of masochistic drive is like when someone says you can't do that, I'm like, watch this, mate. Like, I'd love to know why is that the best piece of advice you've ever received? And then the other part to that question is that how healthy is that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's part of feeling like a fish out of water all the time, is that I've always seen the world in a slightly different way to what everyone else does. And so, with Who Gives a Crap and Shabin, it just felt to me that the world needed these things. Like, it seems bizarre that they don't exist yet. And so, when you try to do new things, when you try to innovate, try to do something that hasn't been done before, when you ask people about it, it is inevitable that people will say to you, you can't do that. That's a silly thing to do. And that, I think, is a very powerful piece of advice, because it tells you that you're either about to go down a very challenging path that will be unfruitful, or you have to figure out how to turn what they've told you into something that motivates you to go and smash through the walls and to try to bring something that's never existed into life, as you talked about with the watch this, I'm going to see what happens. But if you take that energy and you run with it and you're doing something that's a really silly thing to do, that's incredibly dangerous. And so you sort of have to learn how to not react instinctively and actually listen to that advice and think very carefully about what you do next, and then use it as the motivation to run through the walls if that's the direction that you choose to go in. But it probably took me 25, 30 years to get to the place where I could sit with it and dissect it rather than just running through the next wall.
Well, I'm asking for a mate here, so I'm like asking for myself, right? Because I've got that. I probably haven't come to back to this multi-textured. You have this ability to kind of have this nuance and hold two things at the same time. So how did you almost get it to sort of temper downwards and, as you said, dissect? Like, what are some of the specific things you did? Because I think, again, a lot of people will be listening to this thinking I need to run through the next fucking wall, and it's like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I think a big part of it was really sort of learning more about myself and realizing that sometimes what I instinctively will want to do in the moment and react to in the moment is not always the smartest and best thing to do. And when you start to have that realization, I think you can use it and apply it across lots of different parts of your life. And for me, realizing I've got that like burn in my tummy that makes me want to like do something next, and that I can choose whether I do that or not and can control that and harness that, is actually much more powerful than allowing it to kind of overtake me every time.
Yes. As I say, asking for a mate. Conscious of your time, Simon, and super grateful. There's a couple more things I want to explore, then we'll wrap this up. But I'm absolutely loving this. One of my favourite books of all time is 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. And one of the questions he has in that book is like, what is one truth you believe that pretty much everyone else will disagree with you on? I think it's an interesting question. Like, what would you say that is for you? What's one truth you hold on to dearly that most people would disagree with you on?
I think that was probably easier to answer 10 years ago, where for us it was the fundamental belief that every business will have to have a social and environmental strategy in order to be successful in the long run. And 10 years ago, that seemed like a crazy argument. Tesla had just IPO'd for not very much money compared to what they're worth today. Reusable water bottles weren't really a thing. Carbon neutrality was like a weird buzzword that no one knew what it meant. And then you fast forward to where we're at today, and all the biggest brands in the world have net zero strategies. Tesla's the most valuable car company in the world. So we've seen the kind of needle move on sustainability, and I think we're still in the process of seeing it move on the social front as well. And so I think, that was a belief that we had that was probably one that wasn't common or popular 10, 15 years ago, that we've sort of seen the needle, move to where we are. We were the surfer in the water waiting for the wave. Today, I don't know if I have that same belief at the moment. I was talking about this recently, that I think what was really powerful when we got started was that we had a view of the world and how it needed to be that was different to what existed in, the moment we were living in. And we've now built that, and it's worked much better than what we ever thought that it could have done, which is incredible. And that will hopefully enable us to have some amazing impact in the years to come. But I think we now, don't have a view of the world that's fundamentally different to where we're at today, other than, trying to show that every business should hopefully start to adopt a policy that's similar to the profit donation model that we have in our business. So it's probably an extension of that. I'm coming back to your question now. It's nice. Probably that, every business will have to think about not just what they're selling, but also what they do with their profits in order to remain relevant in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And going back to this 10 lessons I wish I knew when I was at uni in 2019, which was like pre-COVID, just before the pandemic. Some of them were like, how can we test this under 2 weeks for less than $500 or quid, whatever? Check your ego out the door. Like there's loads in that. And I thought it was brilliant. I mean, maybe we can put a link to that in the show notes. But I'd love to know 4 years down the line, like, is there any new ones you'd add to that list or potentially update? Because we've had a pandemic in between and the business is much bigger now.
Yeah, there's a really good one that I would add in there, and that's that as you get older and probably start to accumulate more wealth, every dollar that you earn has less marginal impact on your life. When you've got no money at all, $1 is a hell of a lot of money. When you've got, if you've got $1 billion, that extra $1 makes absolutely no difference to what your life looks like. And so when you think about that, it costs $20 to restore someone's eyesight in the developing world. It costs about $2 to give someone a pair of glasses that will fundamentally improve their productivity and allow them to get 20% more out of their working week. It costs, a couple of $100 per person to provide access to clean water and toilets and these things that are absolutely the most basic of human needs. And so if you think about the idea that you can fundamentally change someone's life by restoring eyesight with $20, but as you start to accumulate more wealth, whether you've got that extra $20 in your wallet or not doesn't fundamentally impact your life. You start to see that there's this disconnect between, wealth accumulation of individuals and what the general well-being of the society that we live in around the world looks like. And so the big lesson for me, I think, is that it is important for people to give back. And I think that if we don't, then we will only see more things like wars and terrible loss of life from things like flooding and impacts of climate change. But it's very easy, as you get more wealth to just say, oh, well, now we've paid off our mortgage, let's go and buy, the holiday house, or now we've got that holiday house, let's go and do this other thing. And so I think the healthy thing to do is actually at some point to say, how much is enough? What are we aiming for? as an individual or as a family or as a group of people. And let's write that down and hold ourselves to that as being what success looks like. Because as you start to accumulate wealth, if you say to people, how much money do you need to be successful? They usually will say twice as much money as what I have today. And then when they get to that point, they'll say twice as much money as what I have today. And so you have this creep of expectations that sits in as you start to build wealth yourself, which stops you from actually giving away as much money as what you probably should in order to make the world the better place that it truly needs to be. And so the big lesson for me, having been through that, starting on a bootstrap salary and now having a salary that's a bit more representative of what my role would look like in another company, the big lesson for me is know what that number is and know what it takes to be happy and hold yourself to account for that. Because if you go over that and say that you're not happy, then you're doing a disservice to that previous past version of yourself. And if you can get that right and then give away everything else and other people follow in the footsteps of doing that, I think that is fundamentally how we will be able to create change in the world that we live in.
Again, the narrative of the founder, which we were talking about right at the beginning, was it wasn't necessarily, it's now cool to be an entrepreneur and a founder. I remember when I was leaving university, it was probably on the precipice of that becoming a thing. And a big part of that is you can make serious financial personal wealth. Let's make no bones about that. A lot of founders go into it for that. Not necessarily the core reason, but if Who Gives a Crap does well, you will be prosperous. What is your relationship with personal? I know you briefly talked about it, but say there is a big exit for Who Gives a Crap. How do you think your relationship with money could potentially change, or would it change?
We will give most of it away. Is the fundamental answer to that. And that's for two reasons. One, it's the right thing to do. That extra $20 won't make a difference to us, but will fundamentally change someone else's life. But the other reason is that I think we've experienced that it's important to keep your feet on the ground. And if you become that multi-millionaire, decamillionaire, whatever it is, billionaire, there starts to be a very small number of people that you can relate to in terms of the experiences that you're having. And if you only stay at the nicest hotels in the world, every other hotel is a crappy experience for you. If you only fly private, you don't want to fly first class anymore. You know what I mean?
Yes,
so if you know what your limit is and you know what you're aiming for, and maybe it's that you want to be able to take one nice holiday a year and this is what it looks like, and you want to have, this house, then if you hold yourself to account on that, you can give away everything else that comes after that, knowing that you're happy because you've achieved everything that you've set out to do. But if you get to that point and you've got that nice holiday and you've got that nice house, you just start aiming for the next thing and allowing this expectation creep of what you need to be happy to actually consume you. And ultimately, I think, make you less happy because now all of the things that you used to like are experiences that are below you in terms of the way that you consume today. And so I think that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned in the last 5 to 10 years that's fundamentally different to when I was at university, because it only comes as I've started to, have a salary that got bigger over time, and, realized that, we were able to get close to paying off our mortgage and things like that. And so expectation creep has set in, and it's something that I think everyone should hopefully wrestle with.
No, for sure. I think it's almost someone that came on this podcast and he said, set your that's enough goal. What is the that's enough? Because actually, if you set that goal, and I got, as I say to you, I'm going to Colombia, I've realised that to live in London is extortionate. Fuck that. I can go and sit on a beach in Colombia and Costa Rica. Well, Costa Rica is quite expensive. Final two questions. So the first one is, and I ask this to all guests, but what's one belief you that you had that has radically changed in the last 5 years?
Probably, this is a good one. I probably thought that direct to consumer was the absolute future 5 years ago. E-commerce penetration was only increasing, and I probably thought that the future of the world was D2C, and that you'd eventually see 100% e-commerce penetration. It's only a matter of time. Whereas I think we've shifted our view on that fundamentally, probably starting about 5 years ago. to the view now that you need to be where the customer wants to buy you. And for some customers, that's D2C, but for many others, it's other places. And it's probably come from the realization that acquiring new customers is only getting more expensive as well. So it's harder today to run a D2C business than what it ever has been, and it will only get harder from here. So that's probably the big fundamental change that has come about in the last.
Just quickly, are you trying to go into grocery and retail? Because I know the supermarkets originally said no to you, and then that kind of catalyzed D2C.
Yeah.
What's
So
the
we're
game plan now?
we're in Waitrose in the UK, which has been awesome, and then in Woolworths, which are about 40% of the market in Australia, and Aldi, which are about 10% of the market as well. So really kind of testing out that grocery model, and we've got some stuff in the pipeline in the US. So yeah, we're kind of well and truly moving into a pure omni-channel strategy now. Amazon in the UK, Ocado, Whole Foods in the UK as well. So we're kind of really moving into that, sales channel diversification in a way that's fundamentally different to what we thought we would have done 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago. Honestly, we thought we'd roll the D2C playbook out for much, much longer.
Final question, mate, and I can hear your kids in the background. I asked this to all guests, and I'll let you. I know it's dinner time in Oz, but what's one advice you'd give to them? I know they're much younger, but when they embark out on the world, I just think it's an interesting lens to understand. Like, what's one piece of wisdom you'd pass on to them?
Yeah, I think if you've listened to that talk that I gave at that university, it's probably it's twofold. It's follow your passion, which for me was so fundamentally important to unlocking everything that I had to give. Once I figured out what it was that I was passionate about and could work on that was, able to, really fundamentally shifted what I was able to do, which is very powerful. But it's very hard to do that. I was lucky to figure that out in my 20s. Lots of people never figure that out in their entire lives. And so if you aim for that and you don't succeed at it, that's not a way to live life. And so the other piece of advice I'd give them is to let their passion follow them. And that comes from the idea that sometimes you're doing things that don't feel right. And the reason they don't feel right isn't because you're not passionate about them. It's actually because you're just not good at them. And you need to have experience getting better at them over time in order to realize that this is something that actually you really enjoy and is something that you are truly passionate about. And so sometimes you have to stick it out in the things that feel like they're not a natural fit in order to build up your capability and then become something that you love doing after that. And so it's a bit of a dichotomy, follow your passion, but sometimes you have to let that slide and let your passion follow you.
What a wonderful way to end. And yeah, Simon, so grateful. I know listeners are going to absolutely love that. I think with every guest, there's always a kind of a nexus theme that comes through. And with your story and Who Gives a Crap story, it's this kind of multi-dimensional, multi-texture as a brand and as a human being, which is fascinating. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it, mate.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to chat.